6 years ago, while I was working as the sustainability coordinator for a winery here in Oregon, I was invited to travel to Portugal to visit the cork forests. I didn't even know there were cork forests. My experience with cork was pretty much cork boards and all of the hundreds, maybe thousands of bottles that I've opened to consume. And so when I went there, it changed my life, and it changed my career, and it's the story I want to tell you today. Well, let's start at the beginning where I learned. Cork comes from the bark of an oak tree, the cork oak, or Quercus suber, as its Latin-speaking friends know it. It's a unique tree in the world of forestry because it's the only tree that you can remove all of the bark from without harming the tree. It makes its home in the Mediterranean basin in 7 million acres in 7 different countries: Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. This part of the world is really not very hospitable to forests. It's very arid and prone to forest fire. The soil is very poor, and there's a very low water table. But for some reason, the cork tree thrives in this environment and keeps this 7 million acre region of the world from becoming a desert, which is pretty remarkable. We talk about forest biodiversity in our world, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with this term, forest biodiversity essentially is the plants, animals, and insects that live in that forest. And the more number of plants, animals, and insects that live in a forest, the higher level of forest biodiversity there is. The cork forests have the 3rd highest level of forest biodiversity of any forest region in the world after the Amazonian and Indonesian rainforests. There are 13,000 species of plants, animals, and insects that live in the cork forest that live nowhere else on Earth, including a number of endangered species, 2 of the most endangered being the Iberian eagle and the world's most endangered feline. This is the Iberian lynx. If you're a cat lover, you have to love this picture. There are only 115 of these lynx left on our planet, and all of them live in the cork forest. So, we know that cork is the bark of a tree, but so often I hear from people, and one of my favorite stories is as I travel around the country and give this speech, a lot of people will come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, that was really great. You know, I thought cork was a sponge and it came from the bottom of the ocean." And though that makes me laugh and you laugh, it's not uncommon for people to say that because people don't really know anything about cork. So now that we know that it's the bark of a tree, let's talk about how it's harvested and why it's considered the most sustainable and environmentally friendly forestry practice on the planet. For thousands of years, cork has been harvested by hand using that axe, which has changed little over the 1,000 years, by highly skilled craftspeople. 90% of the forests in the Mediterranean, the cork forests, are owned by individual family farmers who have been doing this for generations. These skilled craftspeople train for about 8 years to learn how to cut into the bark so that they don't cut into the cambium layer and harm the tree. They are also the highest paid agricultural workers in all of Europe. The cork tree, because its bark can come off, I think I need to stop here. I need to get you all on the same page. So wrap your brain around this, because it's counterintuitive to the way we all think about forestry. Cork harvesting is like shearing sheep. The cork bark grows back and is reharvested every 9 years for up to 200 years. So there is no cork shortage. The trees are never cut down. They're protected by national law in all 9 countries. And I know that constantly what I hear, and I even last night at our dinner I heard, "Oh, I heard there was a cork shortage, and what's your organization do? And don't they cut the trees down?" So there's this vast amount of misinformation that flows out there, and so that's part of what our organization does, is helping to educate people about the real way cork is harvested. So it's harvested by hand by these skilled craftspeople once every 9 years. And this is unique not only in the harvesting process of forestry, but in the relationship that the people of the cork forest have to their trees. In all other forestry, people have large tracts of land, and they go, "Okay, we're going to clear plot A111 this year, and they cut all the trees out, and they leave a hole. And they may have some relationship with that planting, that crop, but the trees are gone. In cork forestry, because it's generational and it happens every 9 years, these farmers are going back to the exact same tree every 9 years. I was in Portugal in June of this year, and I was speaking with a farmer who is about my age, and he said to me, Patrick, he took me to a big cork oak tree, and he said, and it was very old, and he said, when I was 8 years old, my grandfather taught me how to start harvesting cork on this tree. And he had been back to that tree every 9 years for 60 years. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Cork is also very light. This woman, the teams work in threes, so the men cut the cork and then the women carry the bark. And it's kind of funny to me. It seems like women would be better at cutting the bark and the men carrying the cork, but the cork is so light, and so that's the way it works. Then the cork is flattened and brought to plants, cut into these beautiful strips of bark, and then that's the way a cork is made. And what's unique about the industry is that it's a 0% waste industry. The cork industry uses every single piece of the bark. When all of those corks are punched out of that piece of bark, that piece of bark is then ground up and made into champagne corks and floors and fabrics and all sorts of gaskets and cork boards and thousands of products. Plus, when they grind the cork, it creates a dust. That dust is vacuumed out of the air and packed into containers and compressed into biomass. The factories then burn that biomass and provide 60% of their own energy to run their plants. This is the most sustainable and environmentally friendly practice on the planet when it comes to forestry and manufacturing. There are 13 billion of those corks made each year, natural corks. This is my favorite picture. On your left, right, however we say that, you'll see a pair of sandals that were found just outside of Stonehenge. They're 2,000 years old from the Roman era. The bottom is leather and the footbed is cork. Next to it, you all recognize the space shuttle. I never fail to get a little bit of goosebumps when I tell the story because it's so remarkable to me. We have a product that's been harvested by hand with no mechanical tools for over 2,000 years. It's natural and comes from a tree. And next to it, we have the most technically advanced vehicle the human race has ever created. That vehicle flew for over 30 years because its fuel tanks were encased in natural cork. Cork doesn't burn until it gets to be 1,000 degrees, and so on takeoff and re-entry, it protected every single shuttle mission. And I just find that wild. There's this bark protecting this billion-dollar, or how many billion-dollar space shuttle. So why are the cork forests in jeopardy? Why am I here? Why does our organization exist? The cork forests aren't in jeopardy because of overuse. They're in jeopardy because of underuse, which again is counterintuitive to the way we think about forestry. About 15 years ago, the wine industry, which buys most of the cork from the cork forests, was concerned about a chemical agent called TCA, or trichloroanisole. It's the thing that makes a wine corked. It smells like a wet cardboard or tastes kind of funky when you open up a bottle. It was assumed that cork was the sole culprit of this corked bottle of wine problem. And so the wine industry went to alternative closure manufacturers like plastic and screw cap and said, can you find us an alternative to cork because the cork quality is not good and we're losing some wine. And so wineries started experimenting and then moving to plastic closures and screw caps. What was the story that was being told was that those closures were more environmentally sound because they were cutting the trees down and there was a cork shortage. Now, a recent study from a European Forestry Institute said that there's enough cork in the cork forest right now, today, to close every single bottle of wine produced in the world for the next 100 years. If that's a shortage, I want that in my checking account. So, why are the forests in trouble? Well, because the wine industry has shifted from cork to alternative closures, the farmers aren't harvesting the bark. Because they're not harvesting the bark, they're not planting new trees. And what they are planting are trees that are not healthy for that region of the world. They're planting pine and eucalyptus, which use a lot of water and degrade the soil and are highly flammable. So the cork forests are starting to degrade due to lack of use, not overuse. And then there's this story that's being told that screw caps and plastic closures are more environmentally sound. So I thought I'd give you a little idea about what we think about that. Plastic closures are sourced from petrochemicals. They're not renewable, they're not biodegradable, and they're not sustainably sourced. No plastic closure is being recycled in the United States today. And all of the plastic that has ever been produced on this planet is still here unless it's been burned. It may break down into microparticles, but plastic never goes away. And there are studies that have shown that these plastic closures are leaching endocrine disruptors into our wine. Endocrine disruptors are suspected to be the biggest culprits in breast and colon cancer in the West. Plus there's one plastic producer in the United States that produces 17 tons of waste per month in making plastic closures. By any stretch of the imagination, that's not sustainable. The aluminum industry, and first let me say I'm not trying to get rid of the aluminum industry, but the idea that aluminum screw cap is sustainably better than a natural cork is hogwash. Bauxite, from which aluminum is made, remains one of the most devastating mining practices left on our planet. There's a toxic sludge that's left over from turning bauxite into alum, and then there's a heavy metal chemical with cyanide that's left over from turning alum into aluminum. Here's a nice statistic. The cork forests absorb 20 million tons of CO2 each year, and a cork tree that's harvested of its bark every 9 years will absorb 10 tons more than a tree that's not harvested. An aluminum smelter, one aluminum smelter in the United States burns 18 million tons of coal a day to produce aluminum. And the aluminum industry is one of the smallest industries in the United States. I think they're 367th out of the top 500. They consume 1% of all of the electricity generated in America to turn alum into aluminum. Aluminum screw caps are not being recycled. So those of you who've been putting them in your recycle bin, you can stop now. I'm sorry to say, but they go into the landfill as particulate matter because they're too small. So I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to me and say, boy, I was buying aluminum screw cap wine because I thought I was saving the cork forest. And I don't, it's hard to respond because I understand that what they're hearing out in the world is, well, they cut the trees down and there's a shortage. So please know that none of that is true. Then we find wines this is my favorite, we find wines that are organic and biodynamic and have big sustainability symbols on the back of the wine, and then they're closed with screw cap or plastic closure. We have a saying at our organization, sealing a bottle of wine with a screw cap or plastic closure is like putting a vegan burger in a leather box. Yeah, it doesn't really work for us. So, what I would like you to take away from my talk today, as you go to dinner parties and you talk to friends and your waiters and your sommeliers and the people who you know when you consume wine, is the trees are never cut down to produce cork. There is no cork shortage. Alternative closures are not sustainable choices by any stretch of the imagination. And the more we use cork, the healthier the forest. Thank you.